Hi, welcome back. Thresholds and Transits. I am happy that you're here. Today we are talking about the blood moon eclipse that is coming up on Tuesday, March 3rd, and that's going to be at 6:02 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to 7:02 Eastern Standard Time, and you can do the math from there. It will be visible from North America and nowhere else. So let's start with something that might be a little counterintuitive. Given that we're in the middle of Mercury retrograde in Pisces, which we have talked about, and a transit that I spent considerable time describing as fog and dissolution and the breakdown of consensus reality. So here it is. Clarity is coming. And we're not talking about clarity that resolves everything. We're not talking about a nice, neat answer wrapped up into a little package. But what is actually real and what you have been telling yourself because it was easier than the truth, that kind of clarity. This clarity arrives on March 3rd, 2026, in the form of a total lunar eclipse at 12 degrees and 54 minutes of Virgo, a blood moon. This is the fifth eclipse in a series that has been running along the Virgo-Pisces axis since September 2024. And it arrives layered with something that most eclipse coverage is not going to touch. Black Moon Lilith, our friend, is squaring the nodes of the moon for an entire week, with the eclipse triggering that square first. So we're going to take some time, settle in. We're going to talk about the mechanics, and the mechanics are the message here. And then we'll connect that with what's actually happening in the world, because this transit isn't just abstract. And I also want to bring in the thread of what we've been developing in the series, the question of knowing whose knowing gets legitimized, who gets to hold authority, and what happens when the truth you're carrying is too large, too passionate, too philosophically inconvenient for the rooms that could platform it. That last question is what Black Moon Lilith squaring the nodes is actually asking. This goes deep. If you are new here, my name is Megan. I am an astrology student and I'm learning. And as I learn, I become even more passionate and even more interested in all the different places that we can learn more about astrology. And the best way to learn is to teach. So I like to share it with you. Also, if you like my content, you can go to my website, meganriley.eu. I'm offering donation-based readings. Just click on the astrology tab and you can schedule a reading that's donation-based. You can send a little, you can send a lot. I'm grateful for everything. I take about an hour before the call and prepare and write some things up as to what I'm seeing to really be prepared for the call. And I think they're scheduled out a few weeks, so you can check in and find a time that is convenient for you. I am in Eastern European time, and I open up times all throughout the day for you and whatever works for you. Okay, let's get started. So section 1. Before we talk about this specific eclipse, let's go to the larger container that it's landing into, because this is not just a standalone event. It is the fifth in a series of 7 eclipses along the Virgo-Pisces axis, running from September 2024 to February 2027. And to understand what March 3rd is asking, you need to understand that the whole series has been building. This eclipse series works like a long-form story. Each eclipse on the series is a chapter. The themes introduced in chapter 1 develop and complicate and deepen through each subsequent eclipse until the final resolution. You cannot fully understand chapter 5 without knowing what happened in chapters 1 through 4. The Virgo-Pisces axis is one of the most philosophically rich polarities in the zodiac. So let's start with the Thema Mundi framework, where Cancer is the ascendant of the cosmos. For Cancer rising, Virgo falls in the 3rd house, the house of communication, of craft, of the articulation of ideas, the tools we use to make meaning legible to others. Pisces falls in the 9th house, the house of philosophy and higher knowledge and belief systems, the sacred and the long journey toward understanding that cannot be put into words. These two signs are in permanent dialogue. The attempt to make the infinite concrete and the recognition that the concrete will always fall short of the infinite. The craft and the mystery. The map and the territory. In the more familiar tropical framework, Virgo is in the 6th sign associated with service and health and daily practice, discernment, and the refinement of technique. Pisces is in the 12th, associated with dissolution, the unconscious, retreat, and the things that cannot be categorized or contained. Both frames are true simultaneously, and the combination tells the complete story. This axis is about the tension between what can be made useful and what refuses to be reduced to usefulness. Since September 2024, this axis has been the primary zone of collective eclipse activity. That means the themes of this axis, the relationship between craft and mystery, between discernment and dissolution, between what can be proven and what can only be trusted, have been the underlying story of collective life for the last 18 months. So let's think about just what happened in that time. The collapse of trust is accelerating. AI-generated reality becoming indistinguishable from documented reality. The dissolution of institutional authority as a reliable arbiter of truth. And, simultaneously, a resurgence of interest in embodied knowing, intuitive intelligence, spiritual practice, and the ways of knowing that the dominant framework has been centuries dismissing as unreliable. That's the Virgo-Pisces axis in motion, and this eclipse, the 5th in the series, is a reckoning point. It's not the end, there are 2 more to come, and it goes through February 2027, but it is a significant turning point in the story. The first eclipse in the series was September 2024, and that planted seeds. Seeds of questioning, seeds of disorientation, seeds of a new kind of discernment that hadn't yet found its form. The second eclipse in March of 2025 at 23 degrees Virgo brought the first fruit and the first loss. Things that had been built on unstable foundations began to show the cracks. The third eclipse in September 2025 at 15 degrees Pisces deepened the dissolution. The fog thickened. Reality became harder to hold and to grasp. The fourth eclipse, September 2025 at 29 degrees Virgo, the last degree of the sign, the degree of completion and urgency, asked, what have you actually learned? What have you distilled from this period? And what remains when the wishful thinking is stripped away? And now, the 5th, March 3rd, 2026, 12 degrees Virgo, total lunar eclipse, blood moon. This is the eclipse that shows you what's real. So what is a lunar eclipse and why Virgo matters here? Let's go into the mechanics. A lunar eclipse occurs when the Earth passes directly between the sun and the moon, casting a shadow across the full moon. The moon never disappears, it turns red because the only light reaching it is the light that's refracted through the Earth's atmosphere. Every sunrise and sunset happening simultaneously on Earth is painting the moon that deep copper red. That is what a blood moon actually is. It is the light of every horizon around the world, all at once, concentrated on the moon. In astrological terms, a lunar eclipse is a full moon amplified beyond its ordinary intensity. Full moons are already moments of culmination and revelation and completion. The moment when what was planted at a new moon reaches its fullest expression and begins to release. A lunar eclipse takes that energy and intensifies it by an order of magnitude. Things that have been building in the dark come fully into the light. Things that were not quite finished get finished, whether you were ready or not. This is a south node eclipse, which means the moon is conjunct the south node. South node eclipses are completion energy. They are karmic in the original sense of the word, not punishment, but consequence, the ripening of what was planted, the resolution, finally, of something that has been waiting. South node eclipses do not tend to feel like dramatic new beginnings. They tend to feel like inevitable endings, like the relief of something finally being named, like the strange peace that comes when you stop pretending something. But why does Virgo matter here specifically? Virgo is the sign of discernment, not judgment, discernment. The distinction matters. Judgment assigns moral value. Discernment distinguishes what is real from what is not, from a functional form of what is dysfunctional, what is nourishing from what is depleting. Virgo is the part of the mind that looks at the actual evidence and tells you the truth about it, even when the truth is inconvenient. Virgo represents the virgin, but that doesn't actually have anything to do with sex. Virgin meant a woman that belongs to no other. So a woman with her own sovereignty, a woman with discernment, that she can choose who she chooses because she chooses, not because of something else. So the virgin has discernment and sovereignty and power. Virgo is also the sign most associated with craft, the patient, painstaking work of making something perfect, excellent. Virgo is often associated with perfectionism, but that can be the shadow. The light of Virgo is the understanding that excellence is a practice, not a destination. That showing up consistently, refining your tools, attending to the details that matter. This is how you build something real. And Virgo is the sign of useful service, not servitude, service. The distinction again matters between the two. Servitude is compliance under compulsion. Service is the offering of your gifts to the genuine need of others. Virgo at its most evolved is the question, what do I have that is actually needed? And how do I offer it with enough precision that it helps? A lunar eclipse in Virgo is asking all of those questions at once, with full illumination in the register of completion and in release. What have you been building? Is it real? Is it useful? Is it in service? And what needs to be released? What version of yourself, what narrative, what attachment to a particular outcome, so that what is real can come forward. That's this eclipse. And now let's talk about what's happening all around it. So it's not happening in isolation, like nothing is. It's happening on March 3rd, 2026, which is inside the Mercury retrograde in Pisces. Mercury stationed retrograde on the 25th of February and doesn't station direct until March 20th. The eclipse happens 8 days into the retrograde. And if you haven't seen the Mercury retrograde video, go watch that because it's so rich and it's going to build on this argument. The dissolution of the boundary between fact and feeling and the breakdown of collective trust. The fog that makes it genuinely difficult to distinguish what is real from what has been constructed. And if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen because it's very good. Okay, here's what I want to say. A Virgo eclipse inside Mercury retrograde in Pisces is a very specific kind of experience. It's a clarity arriving inside the fog. It is discernment operating under conditions that make discernment difficult. It is the most interesting possible configuration for this eclipse, because that means that the clarity that arrives on March 3rd is not the easy kind of clarity. It is not the kind of clarity that comes when everything is already clear and you just need to confirm and validate what you already knew. It is the kind that comes when you have been sitting in genuine confusion, genuinely unable to tell which way is up, and something shifts and suddenly you can see. That kind of clarity is harder won, and it tends to be more durable because it has been tested by the fog. The Virgo-Pisces opposition that structures this eclipse is also exactly the Mercury retrograde polarity. Mercury is retrograding through Pisces. the ninth house of philosophy and sacred knowing, the sign of dissolution and mystery. The eclipse moon is in Virgo, the sign of craft and discernment and useful service. The sun is opposing it in Pisces, the same sign that Mercury is retrograding through. So on March 3rd, we have the moon in Virgo trying to see clearly, the sun in Pisces bathed in this Neptunian fog, and a Mercury retrograde in Pisces, retrograding through the residue of 15 years of Neptune's dissolution through Pisces. The Virgo moon is doing her best to discern, to be sovereign, to see. She's working harder than usual. And what she finds under these conditions is going to be significant precisely because she sees through the fog. There's something about the relationship between discernment and mystery. Virgo and Pisces are not opposites in the sense of being enemies, they are complements of each other. Virgo's discernment and sovereignty is not the enemy of Piscean mystery, it's what makes the mystery navigable. Without discernment, mystery becomes confusion. Without mystery, discernment becomes arid and inhuman. The eclipse is asking for both simultaneously in a full awareness of how difficult that balance is to maintain right now. So now let's get to the piece that the most eclipse coverage of this is going to miss. And in my view, it is the most important and the most delicious. So on March 3rd, the eclipse occurs with Black Moon Lilith at 8 degrees of Sagittarius. The eclipse moon is at 12 degrees Virgo. The sun is at 12 degrees of Pisces, and the nodes are at 8 degrees of Pisces and Virgo. Black Moon Lilith at 8 degrees Sagittarius is an exact square to the nodal axis. 5 days later, on March 8th, the nodes perfect their square to Black Moon Lilith at exactly 8 degrees and 8 degrees. The square is perfect and exact. So that means that we have a week from the eclipse on March 3rd through March 8th, during which Black Moon Lilith is in exact square to the nodes of the moon. This is a foreground event, and it is happening simultaneously with a lunar eclipse. So why does this matter? I need to explain what Black Moon Lilith actually is and what it means when she squares the nodes. Black Moon Lilith is not a planet. She is a mathematical point, the point in the moon's orbit where the moon is the furthest from the earth. In mythological terms, she is associated with the original Lilith of the Jewish mystical tradition, the first woman made from the same earth as Adam, who refused to subordinate herself and was expelled from Eden, or she left Eden. She is the feminine that will not be tamed. She is the knowing that will not be made easy or palatable. She does not buy into the system. She is the part of any chart and any psyche that carries the memory of exile, that carries the memory of being too much. Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius, where she currently is transiting through Sagittarius from December 2025 through September 2026. And it's specifically about the exile of philosophical and spiritual authority. Sagittarius is the sign of the teacher, the philosopher, the truth teller, the one who has traveled far enough to have a larger perspective than most. Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius is the wisdom that gets dismissed as dangerous, the teacher who gets burned, the truth that is suppressed because it's too expansive, too unruly, too inconvenient for the institutions that control what counts as legitimate knowledge. When Black Moon Lilith squares the nodes, she is not in the background. She is in direct tension with the karmic story, with what has been accumulated from the past and what is being called into the future. A square is a friction aspect. It creates pressure. It forces a choice. And when Black Moon Lilith is the one that's creating that pressure, the choice tends to be about whether you are willing to be fully yourself. In all of your inconvenient, unruly, too muchness, or whether you are going to manage yourself down one more time. The South Node in Virgo during this eclipse is particularly significant. The South Node represents what has been accumulated from the past: karma, ancestry, lineage, the pattern, the habitual response. South Node in Virgo in this eclipse is specifically the pattern of over-editing, over-refining, making yourself more palatable, the areas where you haven't been sovereign, where you have turned yourself down, where you cut off the parts of yourself that felt too big or too demanding. Virgo shadow is not bad work, it's good work that has been shrunk. It's the essay that started as a manifesto and ended as a memo. It's the teaching that started as a revelation and got sanded down to something easier and acceptable. Black Moon Lilith squaring that South Node is asking, what have you been sanding down? And what was the cost? The North Node in Pisces is the invitation. Pisces in the 9th house of the Thema Mundi, the house of philosophy and sacred knowledge and the divine. The North Node is asking for full surrender to the knowing, not the managed version, not the version that's been pre-approved by the gatekeepers, the full version, the one that comes through you when you stop worrying about whether it's going to be okay. This is the axis of this eclipse, and Black Moon squaring it is the pressure that makes the choice unavoidable. So let's talk about the mythological and historical lineage here, because I think it's important. The figure of Lilith appears in Jewish mystical tradition, most notably in the alphabet of Ben Sira. In that tradition, Lilith was the first woman, created from the same earth as Adam, at the same time as an equal. The problem arose when Adam insisted on the position of dominance in their sexual relationship, and Lilith refused. She spoke the ineffable name of God, an act of claiming her own divine authority, and flew away from Eden. What happened next is the part that matters for our purpose. God sent 3 angels to bring her back. She refused. She was told she would be punished, that her children would die. She accepted the punishment rather than comply. She chose exile over subordination. This is the archetype. She's not a demon, though patriarchal tradition made her one later. She's not a monster. She's been depicted one for centuries. She's a being who chose exile over the diminishment of her nature, a being who said, I would rather be cast out than be made smaller. The demonization of Lilith in itself is a form of the same pattern. When the feminine refuses to comply, the dominant framework does not simply disagree with her, it makes her dangerous. It makes her evil. It makes her someone to be afraid of, because a woman who will not be managed is a genuine threat to systems that depend on her management. This is what Black Moon Lilith in the chart represents. Not evil, not danger, not stealing babies, not screeching owls, the place in your own psyche where you carry the memory of exile for being too much, too powerful, too passionate, too sexy, too loud, too certain of yourself, too unwilling to make yourself smaller for the comfort of others, and the place where, if you are willing to go there, you find your most essential and irreducible truth. Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius carries the memory of exile for philosophical and spiritual truth-telling. This is the sign of the prophet, the seer, the philosopher, the teacher, who has traveled further than most and come back with the news that the people in power do not want to hear. History is full of these figures. Hypatia of Alexandria, the philosopher and mathematician who was murdered by a Christian mob in 415 CE for her teaching and her refusal to convert. The witches of the early modern period, most of them healers and midwives and women who held knowledge that the church wanted to control. Giordano Bruno, burned at the stake in 1600 for teaching that the universe was infinite and the stars were other suns. Joan of Arc, who heard divine voices and led armies and was burned as a heretic when her political usefulness expired. All of them carrying something too large, too unruly, too inconvenient for the institutions of their time. All of them exiled, or worse, for refusing to make their knowing palatable. Black Moon Lilith squaring the nodes during this eclipse is not asking you to be a martyr. It's asking you to notice where you have been preemptively martyring yourself. Where have you been burning your own work before anyone else could burn it? Because you learned that being too much is dangerous. And it's asking, what would happen if you stopped burning your own work? What would happen if you stopped martyring yourself? Now, the intellectual framework. So in the Mercury retrograde episode, we talked a lot about the work of feminist philosophers, Patricia Hill Collins, Sandra Harding, Miranda Fricker, the authors of Women's Ways of Knowing. The central argument of that body of work is the dominant Western framework. Rational, empirical, measurable, reproducible knowledge is not neutral. It was constructed by a particular group of people, and it systematically excludes or devalues the ways of knowing that other groups have relied on. Miranda Fricker's concept of injustice is particularly relevant here. She identifies two forms: testimonial injustice, when someone's testimony is given less credibility because of their social identity, and hieromenical injustice, where there is a gap in our collective interpretive resources that puts someone at an unfair disadvantage in understanding or expressing their own experience. Both forms are Black Moon Lilith territory. Testimonial injustice is the experience of being dismissed, of having your knowing treated as unreliable because of who you are or how you look. Hieromenical injustice is the experience of not even having the language to name what you know, of carrying something real that the dominant framework has no category for. Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius, squaring the nodes during the eclipse. This is specifically the movement when this dynamic becomes unavoidable. The South Node in Virgo is the accumulated pattern of managing your knowing down to make it legible for a framework that was never designed to receive it. The North Node in Pisces is the invitation to trust, the full knowing, this ninth house knowing, the sacred knowing, the knowing that doesn't need a peer-reviewed citation to be real. The square from Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius is the pressure that makes the choice urgent. Because Black Moon Lilith is not patient. She doesn't wait for a convenient moment. She doesn't ask nicely. She creates a rupture, and in the rupture, something that has been suppressed arises. The question is whether what comes through gets welcomed or whether it gets managed back into silence. Let's talk about what that management looks like in practice, because it's rarely dramatic. It rarely looks like censorship or suppression. It usually looks much quieter. It looks like editing out the most passionate paragraph because it might be too intense. It looks like framing the radical argument in the most acceptable possible language. It looks like preempting something. I may be crazy, but it looks like leading with credentials rather than conviction. It looks like anticipating the objections of people who were never going to be your audience anyway. And it looks like shrinking your work to address the objections rather than expanding it to serve the people it was actually for. This is the South Node in Virgo pattern that the eclipse is asking you to release. Your over-refinement, your preemptive shrinking, the endless editing in the direction of being palatable. And what Black Moon Lilith squaring the nodes is asking is, what is this most fully itself version of what you have to say? Not the version that's been cleared for general consumption, not the one that was dumbed down so that most people understand your vocabulary, the version that came through before you started managing it. So let's be some specific texture on this, because the transit is not happening in a philosophical vacuum. And if you're listening from outside the US, which I know many of you are, I speak directly to what the view from Europe looks like right now, because it's clarifying in a way that the view from inside the fog is not. We are 8 days into the Mercury retrograde in Pisces. The fog that I described in detail in the episode is fully active. AI-generated content is functionally indistinguishable from document reality at scale. What journalists are calling the pink slime, algorithmically generated local news that mimics journalism while containing none of its accountability, is operating across thousands of outlets. Political communication from the highest levels of power is deliberately constructed to generate anxiety rather than information. The mechanisms for distinguishing real from synthetic have broken down. And into this fog, specific, concrete, documented things are happening that the fog makes harder to hold in collective awareness. On March 15th, 2025, almost exactly a year before this eclipse, a 23-year-old American citizen named Ruben Ray Martinez was shot multiple times and killed by a federal Homeland Security investigations officer on South Padre Island in Texas. He was there with his best friend celebrating his birthday. He worked at an Amazon warehouse. He had never run in with the law enforcement in his life. His mother told the Associated Press he was a typical young guy. He never got a chance to go out and experience things. That shooting was reported in local media at the time. But what wasn't reported, because it wasn't disclosed, was that a federal immigration agent fired the shots. The fact remained hidden for almost a year until records obtained by a watchdog organization, American Oversight, through a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, forced its disclosure in February 2026. A year of his mother knowing that her son was dead, but not being told the full story of how. This week, just this week, as I record this episode, a 56-year-old Burmese refugee named Nurul Amin Shah Alam was found dead on a street in Buffalo, New York. He had spent nearly a year at an Erie County holding facility. He is nearly blind. He does not speak English. He used a curtain rod as a walking stick. Last week, a plea deal was reached that should have resolved his case and allow him to go home to his family. Instead, Border Patrol agents took him from the facility, determined he could not be deported because he had entered the country legally as a refugee, and dropped him off at a Tim Hortons coffee shop 5 miles from where his family lives, in the cold of night, without contacting his attorney or his family. He went missing. His family and his attorney spent days looking for him. He was found dead on February 24th. The Buffalo mayor called it a preventable death and a dereliction of duty. Border Patrol said he showed no signs of distress, mobility issues, or disabilities requiring special assistance. A nearly blind man with a curtain rod for a walking stick, dropped off alone in sub-zero temperatures. These are not isolated incidents. The American Immigration Council documented at least 6 deaths in ICE custody in January 2026 alone. In Texas, Pennsylvania, Georgia, California, more than 30 people died in immigration detention in 2025, a record that 2026 is already on pace to surpass. ICE is currently detaining over 70,000 people, a historic high, with plans to expand to a network of warehouse-style facilities, some capable of holding 10,000 people each. 3 out of 4 people currently held in immigration detention have no criminal conviction. 1 in 20 has been convicted of a violent crime. At the same time, in an unrelated scandal that is in fact deeply related thematically, the former UK ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson, was arrested on February 23rd on suspicion of misconduct in public office, following the release of millions of pages of Epstein-related documents by the US Department of Justice. The documents appear to show him making market-sensitive government information to Jeffrey Epstein when he was a British cabinet minister. This arrest came days after the former Prince Andrew was stripped of his royal title. Now, legally, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was arrested on the same suspicion. Both have been released on bail pending investigation. Both are accused of the same fundamental act, using the cover of their institutional authority to pass information through private channels that circumvented public accountability. What all of these stories share, Reuben Ray Martinez, Nurul Amin Shah Alam, Peter Mandelson, and Prince Andrew, is the same structural pattern that Virgo illuminates and Black Moon Lilith refuses to tolerate. Information that is managed, suppressed, or rerouted through the back channels to serve the interests of those with institutional power at direct cost to those without the power. The mechanisms that are supported to ensure transparency and accountability, journalism, freedom of information law, the criminal justice system, functioning only when forced to, only under pressure, only after irreversible damage has been done. From where I live in Europe, that pattern is visible in a way that I think is harder to see from inside it. European heads of state and foreign policy officials are openly using the language at major diplomatic forums that would have been considered extreme rhetoric 2 years ago. At the Munich Security Conference in February, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas, speaking directly to the US Secretary of State, said flatly, while America and Europe remain intertwined, they do not see eye to eye, and that Europe will continue to stand by its values. European citizens are attending anti-ICE protests. In Paris, a French protester told the Christian Science Monitor, "I always thought the US was sheltered from all of this." The language of the outside observer, looking in at the fog, watching specific documented people die and disappear from inside it. And this is as Ukraine enters its 4th year of active war this week. As of February 24th, 2026, this is 4 years of a land war on European soil, with the political support of the country that has been historically anchored European security now in active question. This is the world the eclipse is landing into. In this context, what does it mean that Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius is squaring the nodes? What does it mean that the figure who represents the exile of inconvenient truth is in direct tension with the karmic axis of collective evolution? It means that truth-telling, real truth-telling, the kind that comes from real knowing, genuine knowing, rather than the performance of knowing, is both more dangerous and more necessary than it has been in a really long time. More dangerous because the fog makes it easy to dismiss. Because in a landscape where everything is uncertain and everyone's reality is contested, the person who claims to know something, really know something from the inside, from experience, from years of practice and observation, can be easily discredited. The fog is useful to the power. It creates conditions where any claim to knowing is challenged, where the person with the institutional platform can always say, but how do you really know? And the person without it has no recourse. Reuben Ray Martinez's mother knew that her son was dead, but she didn't know the full story for a year. That gap between what she knew and what she was permitted to know is the injustice in its most direct form. More necessary because the people who are drowning in the fog are not looking for more information. They are looking for someone who actually knows something, someone who has done the work, who's developed the discernment, the sovereignty, cultivated the capacity to see clearly under conditions that make clarity difficult. Someone who is willing to say what they actually see without managing it down for palatability. That is Virgo's gift in this eclipse, not certainty. Virgos know any better than any sign that certainty is a trap, but discernment. The patient, practiced, hard-won capacity to distinguish what is real from what is not, what is functional from what is dysfunctional, and what actually serves from what only appears to serve. And that is what Black Moon Lilith squaring the nodes is asking to be released into the world. The discernment that comes from genuine knowing, not performed, not palatable, not pre-approved by gatekeepers, not shrunk to fit the container of what the dominant framework is willing to accept. The full version, the one that came through before the editing started. So let's bring in Saturn, because Saturn is doing something significant during this eclipse. Most coverage is going to miss this. So Saturn is now in Aries, having moved there along with the Neptune in late January 2026. But Saturn's conjunction with Neptune at 0 degrees on February 20th, 5 days before Mercury stations retrograde and 11 days before this eclipse, is still actively shaping the field that we're operating in. So I talked about the conjunction in the Mercury retrograde episode, but let's revisit it from the angle of this eclipse. Saturn conjunct Neptune at 0 degrees Aries was the conjunction of structure and dissolution. Old forms dissolving before new ones are established. The gap between the ending and the beginning, the in-between space, where what was is gone and what will be hasn't arrived yet. And in the Thema Mundi, 0 degrees Aries falls in the 10th house, the house of authority and culmination and worldly power. Saturn conjunct Neptune there was specifically about the structures of authority dissolving, the forms of power that organized collective life losing their coherence before new forms have emerged. Now, 11 days later, we have a Virgo eclipse asking, of everything that has dissolved, what was real? What had the genuine substance and what was only held together by the appearance of authority? What remains when the institutional scaffolding comes down? This is Saturn's question in Aries, the planet of structure, now in the sign of new beginnings, asking what is actually worth building. And the Virgo eclipse is providing the discernment to answer that question honestly. What remains after dissolution is what was actually built on solid ground. The work that was done out of genuine conviction and genuine service and genuine craft, that stays. The work that was done to satisfy the gatekeepers and to perform for audiences and clickbait, that was never going to be reached. It was to make something acceptable that needed to be unruly. All of that dissolves. So this is maybe an uncomfortable message, but it's a clarifying one, which is this whole eclipse is clarifying. And Virgo, at her best, can hold the discomfort of clarity because she knows that clarity is what makes genuine service possible. You cannot actually help someone with a version of your work that has been so thoroughly managed and watered down that the essential thing and voice has been edited out. Let's go back to the lineage of women mystics. Because Black Moon Lilith node square makes that lineage directly relevant to this transit in a whole new way. In that episode, I talked about the women who preserved their knowing through channels the dominant framework had inadvertently just left open. Divine revelation, mystical experience, embodied knowing, Hildegard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich, the Benguines, women who found that one door that was not locked and walked through it carrying everything that they knew. And let's add here, none of them did it by making themselves smaller. That's the thing that gets lost in the romantic telling of their stories. We remember them as gentle and humble and self-effacing, but there was genuine humility in their work, the real Virgoan humility, the humility of craftspeople who know the work is never finished. It will never be perfect. The humility of the mystic who knows that the knowing is always larger than the one who carries it. But they were not small. Hildegard of Bingen corresponded with popes and emperors and told them when they were wrong. Julian of Norwich spent decades in a cell producing theology so radical that it would not be fully understood for centuries, and she did not apologize. Teresa of Avila reformed an entire religious order against fierce institutional opposition and wrote about the interior life of the soul with a directness and precision that took the church's breath away. They were exiled, they were constrained, they worked within the only channels that were available to them. But within those channels, they were fully themselves. They never made themselves smaller to fit the container. They expanded the container. This is the invitation of Black Moon Lilith, who's squaring the nodes at this eclipse. It's not to ignore the constraints. Virgo is too practical and realistic for that. We're not pretending that the gatekeepers don't exist. They do. But to stop preemptively shrinking in anticipation of their disapproval. To stop editing out the most essential thing that you had to say before anyone has even had a chance to receive it. The exiled knowers of history did not know whether their work would survive. They did not know whether one door left open would remain open. But they did the work anyway, without managing it down for palatability, for the best audience. Their work survived a millennium later, and we are still reading it. So this eclipse is hitting most directly, so you can assess how this might affect you personally. The eclipse is at 12 to 13 degrees Virgo, is most directly activating personal planets and points in the mutable signs: Virgo, Pisces, Gemini, and Sagittarius, and between 7 and 17 degrees. So if you have your sun, moon, rising, or any personal planets in degrees of those signs, this is speaking directly to you. The Black Moon Lilith node square is activating the same mutable cross, specifically around 7 to 9 degrees. So if you have anything, planets, angles, nodes, significant points in that range of any mutable sign, the Black Moon Lilith activation is personal for you. But let's say something about eclipses that I don't think is said enough. You don't have to have a direct hit to feel this. Eclipses aren't only personal events, they are collective ones. The shift in the collective field affects everyone, regardless of whether the eclipse is making a direct aspect to your chart. What the eclipse is doing collectively is this: it's illuminating with full Virgo clarity the pattern of exile, the collective habit of managing inconvenient truth down for palatability. The accumulated damage of 15 months of the Virgo-Pisces eclipse series, in which the collective has been repeatedly asked to confront the gap between what it actually knows and what it is willing to say it knows. And Black Moon Lilith squaring the nodes is making that confrontation unavoidable, not just for the individuals whose charts are directly activated, for the collective conversation, for the cultural movement, for the question that is sitting at the center of every room right now, which is, who actually has the authority to know what is true? And on what basis is that true? The question is only starting now, and it doesn't go away on March 8th. But the eclipse and Black Moon Lilith nodes square are going to make it undeniable for a whole week. So pay attention to what surfaces. You might be surprised. And let's talk about the positive invitation of this eclipse. Because I've been spending a lot of time on the pressure and the release and the exile of the reckoning. All of that is real. But the eclipse is also offering something. The Virgo-Pisces axis at its best is the marriage of craft and mystery. The understanding that the work of making, writing, teaching, healing, building is at its most powerful when it is in genuine service to something larger than the maker. When the craft is in service of the mystery rather than in competition of it. This is what Hildegard understood when she wrote her music. She wasn't composing in spite of the divine. She was composing as an instrument of the divine. The extraordinary technical sophistication of her work wasn't separate from its mystical quality. It was the form through which the mystical quality could be received. The craft made the mystery legible. This is what the eclipse is asking you to build. Not work that sacrifices mystery for legibility. That's the Virgo shadow, the pedantic reducing of everything to what can be verified and categorized, and not work that sacrifices legibility for mystery. That is the Pisces shadow, the beautiful but incomprehensible vision that never quite makes contact with the world it was meant to serve. So the marriage, the full version, the thing that is both rigorously crafted and completely itself, the thing that did not get sanded down in the direction of palatability, but also did not mistake unruliness for depth. That is Virgo's discernment, and it is in this eclipse, not to shrink the work, to refine it, to ask with genuine precision, what is the most fully itself version of what I have to offer? And then offer it without managing it, trusting that the people it is for will find it. Let's be practical, because I think the worst thing that I could do is leave you with a rich picture of what's happening and then nothing to do with it. So the week of March 3rd through March 8th is a significant window. And here's how I would suggest approaching it. In the days leading up to the eclipse, so today is the 27th of February, up to the 3rd, now, essentially, notice where you have been editing yourself. Maybe not in the obvious ways, but the subtle ones. Notice what you wrote and then deleted, what you said and then softened a little bit, what you knew and then qualified until the knowing was barely visible, what you put on and then took off because it might have been too much. You're not looking to judge yourself for this. Virgo's discernment is not judgment. You are looking to see the pattern clearly so the eclipse can complete it. On March 3rd itself, the eclipse is at 6:38 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is a lunar eclipse, which means it's visible where the moon is above the horizon, mostly the Americas. You don't need to be awake at the exact moment of the eclipse for it to be relevant, but you can spend some time on that day in quiet attention. I would recommend it. Notice what surfaces. Notice what feels complete. Notice what feels ready to be released. The fog of Mercury retrograde is still active, which means the clarity of the eclipse will not necessarily arrive in a linear or rational form. It may arrive as a feeling, an image, a certain certainty about something that you have been circling around for months, a conversation that just cuts through, a piece of work that finally comes together in a way that feels true. Be receptive to clarity that comes in all the ways. In the days between the eclipse and the nodal structure on March 8th, pay attention to the Black Moon Lilith activation. This is likely to feel like urgency around something that has been suppressed, something that you know you have not been saying, something that you have been managing down, softening, making easier, and now that thing is pushing back. The temptation will be manage it down again, and the eclipse is saying don't. On March 8th, when the nodes perfect their square to Black Moon Lilith, there is a moment of choice. Not necessarily a dramatic one. That often they're quiet from the outside, but they begin something significant. A moment when you can feel the fork in the road and the direction of contraction, managing down, editing out, making acceptable, and the direction of expansion, saying the thing, offering the work, trusting that the people it is for will find it. The nodal axis is the karmic spine of your chart. The south node is the accumulated past, the lineage, the ancestry. The north node is the direction of evolution. When Black Moon Lilith squares both, she's not asking which direction you want to go. She's asking whether you are willing to stop letting the fear of exile make the choice for you. Specific areas to pay attention to. Anything in your life where you have been performing usefulness rather than offering real service. Anywhere where you have been making yourself more legible to people who were never going to be your people. Any creative or professional work that started as one thing and then got refined into something safer, or you were coached into being a different way. Any relationship, personal or professional, where you have been editing your truth to manage the other person's comfort. The eclipse is not asking you to blow anything up. Virgo is too sensible for that. It's just asking you to see clearly and then to make one small, precise choice in the direction of being fully, widely yourself. One paragraph that doesn't get deleted, one conversation that doesn't get softened, one offering that goes out as it actually is without the preemptive apology. This is how eclipses work. Sometimes they are sudden, but usually it's the accumulation of small, precise choices in the direction of what is real and where you are going. Let's go back wide. So we are in the 5th eclipse of a 7 eclipse series along the Virgo-Pisces axis. That series runs through February 2027, and we are more than halfway through. The first half of the series, the eclipses of 2024 and 2025, were primarily about dissolution, about the breakdown of structures that were not built on solid ground, about the fog and the confusion and the loss of consensus reality, the collective inability to agree on what was true. Mercury retrograde in Pisces, which is active right now, is in some ways the capstone of that first movement. It's the deepest moment of the fog. The eclipse on March 3rd is a turning point, not the end of the fog. Mercury doesn't station direct until March 20th, and the Virgo-Pisces series has 2 more eclipses after this to come. But a moment of clarity inside the fog. A moment when Virgo's discernment cuts through and shows you exactly what is real. The remaining eclipses, August 2026 in Pisces and February 2027 in Virgo, will be building on what becomes clear now. The seeds of the next chapter are being planted in this eclipse. So whatever you choose to release and what you choose to claim in this window will shape the next 18 months of your evolution along this axis. This is what the Black Moon Lilith node square matters so much, because Black Moon Lilith is asking the big question, the foundational question: are you willing to be fully yourself in your work, in your knowing, in your offering? Not the managed version, the actual version of you. And the nodal axis is telling you this question is karmic. This has been building for a long time. That some people believe it's past lifetimes. Some people believe that it's your lineage. The South Node in Virgo carries the accumulated pattern of all the times that you have made yourself smaller. It could be all the times that your lineage has made themselves smaller. The North Node in Pisces holds the invitation of the fully realized offering, the grounded, somatic offering, the work that is in complete alignment and with the sacred knowing that moves through you. The eclipse is the moment when you can see that clearly, when the gap between what you are offering and what you actually have to offer becomes visible. What you do with that visibility is the work of the next 18 months. The total lunar eclipse in Virgo occurs March 3rd, 2026 at 12 degrees and 54 minutes at exactly 6:38 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Black Moon Lilith squares the nodes through approximately March 8th. Mercury stations direct on March 20th. The Virgo-Pisces eclipse series continues through February 2027. So we're inside this significant moment. It's not only that, not the only significant moment. This period is dense with them. February has been crazy with them. As the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and the Mercury retrograde and the Mars square Uranus, and now this eclipse and Black Moon Lilith trining Saturn, they're all converging in this short window. But this one has a specific quality to name, and it's asking you to stop shrinking. Not because the gatekeepers who made shrinking feel necessary weren't real, they're real. Not because the punishment wasn't real, it's real. Not because the exile that Lilith represents, the exile for being too much and too passionate and too certain of your knowing, was not genuinely painful when it happened, because it was. But because the whole world is drowning in managed versions of things, in truth that has been pre-approved for palatability, in knowing that has been dressed up among enough credentials and qualifications to be acceptable to people who were never going to receive it anyway. And the people who are actually hungry for genuine discernment, for sovereignty, for real knowing, for agency in their body, for the thing that has survived the fog and the dissolution and the reckoning, is still standing because it was built on something real. Those people are not being served by the managed, palatable version. They're waiting for the full version. Let's close with this image. So this week, 56-year-old man named Nural Amin Shah Alam, a Burmese refugee, nearly blind, unable to speak English, using a curtain rod as a walking stick, was dropped off alone by federal agents at a coffee shop in Buffalo, New York, at night, in winter, below zero, miles from where his family had moved. No one called his attorney. No one called his family. Border Patrol said he showed no signs of needing assistance. He wandered for days, and he was found dead on the street on February 24th. That story only broke because journalists and a legal aid attorney kept asking questions the official record was designed to make unanswerable. The same pattern that kept Ruben Ray Martinez's death officially vague for nearly a year. The same pattern that is keeping 70,000 people in detention facilities whose conditions are documented primarily through lawsuits and FOIA requests, because institutional transparency has been replaced with a managed version. What the managed version cannot hold is the full weight of what is actually happening. And the managed version of your work, the one that has been pre-approved for palatability, the one that was edited in the direction of the audience you are afraid of rather than the audience that was actually waiting, is not holding it either. The lineage of women mystics and philosophical exiles that we've been talking about, Hildegard and Julian and Teresa and the Benguines, the healers whose names we do not know, they do not give the managed version. They can't afford to. The channels available to them were narrow enough that they had to put everything through. Every vision, every knowing, every piece of theology that the institution would have told them was too much. It all went in. Because there was only that one door, and they had to use the one door fully. We have more doors than they had, and we are using them to distribute managed versions of the things that could be full versions. So the Eclipse is asking, what is the full version of what you have to offer? Not what you can say that will be acceptable. What do you actually know? What has survived the fog? Are you willing to offer it without the apology, without the clarifying, without the editing and the direction of palatability, without managing it down for the comfort of people who are never going to be your audience anyway? Black Moon Lilith is not gentle about this question. She never is. She shows you exactly where you have been making yourself smaller, with the particular clarity that comes from knowing exactly what exile feels like and having chosen it anyway. The nodes are telling you, this is not a small question. It is the karmic question of this period. The South Node pattern to release, and the North Node invitation to step in. And the eclipse is doing what lunar eclipse is doing. They illuminate. They show you in the blood red light of every horizon simultaneously around the world what is actually real. Just go towards that.